For me, it was really interesting. Yeah, it was really interesting when the team at Sylius reached out and suggested that I might speak at this conference. For me, it's interesting. It's always interesting meeting a new community. We see a lot of the same things. In fact, I'm having a lot of discussions with some of my friends and colleagues from my previous days at another platform. The one, the one that should not be named. The Voldemort of e-commerce systems. I'm not going to say it now. But in the end, we have different logos, we have different names, but we're solving the same problems, right? E-commerce is e-commerce. So for me, I get to have these kind of commerce discussions regularly. So my wife lives a very rich and fulfilling life and usually tells me to shut up when I start talking about this stuff. And she can never, ever have an e-commerce experience without me looking over her shoulder, sort of critiquing the whole flow and everything. But in particular, so I think every platform has its ideas. Every platform has its opinions, and we all have different architectural ways of approaching things. So I was just 2 days ago, I was in Texas, and there's a nice picture online of me with the SVP from BigCommerce and the Chief Strategy Officer from Commerce Tools. And I like working with these people because we're all focused on the same thing. Like, we're all trying to solve the problems for merchants, and we're all using ecosystems to do it, and we all have our different technical approaches. But for me, open source, I have a theory that open source is one of the best approaches to solving these kind of challenges in e-commerce, for reasons that I'll get into. And it was no mistake that I've never actually had Romanesco broccoli. This is actually broccoli, and it is an instance of sort of a pattern of chaos, of fractal in the natural world. And that's kind of how I see open source. There's a reason that like Harry Ponce de Leon and his group of vagabond people back in the early 2000s hit on this idea of like, well, we'll use the principles of free software, eventually called open source, and they created this thing called OS Commerce. I actually reached out to him. I have a podcast that I'm doing now where I just interview people who've made kind of the history of this business. And I reached out to him yesterday, so I'll have him on soon. Commerce Famous is the name of the podcast. You should subscribe. It helps my KPIs. But we'll get into it. So where did commerce start for me? Well, I was lucky. I grew up on a horse farm. Well, not so lucky because I'm allergic to horses, but I grew up on a horse farm. My dad was working at a bank in the U.S. And he was one of the higher ups. And his role ended up being information systems. So he was running mergers and acquisitions for them, but he also was the guy who, like, when they would acquire a brand of banks, and then 500 banks would close on a Friday, and then when they opened on Monday, they were now the bank that he was a part of. But I remember him bringing home something. This was in the 80s. And he brought home basically a set-top box, just a little box, plugged it into the phone line, and plugged it into the TV. And it was called Viewtron, and it was like kind of an early vision of the internet. So basically what was happening was, yes, there was a modem, and this box was communicating with servers, as he explained to me, and I'm a fascinated, like, 9-year-old, in California somewhere. And you could go through and you could navigate, and they presented the news. I mean, this basically, if anyone here is old enough to remember like the early days of AOL and internet portals, World Wide Web portals, it was very much that. Now, obviously, it didn't go very far, and then naturally over time, the ISPs came on, and they started to own that experience, and then now we have the world that we have today. And I've given presentations on the history of commerce online. There's a lot of interesting stuff there, like who knows what the very first transaction on the web was for? Nope. You were really close though. It was for pot, for marijuana. And it was in the early days. Actually, really, it's a bit of a trick question, right? So it depends on how you define the web and stuff, because this is actually in the early days of ARPANET, where you had someone. There were kids at MIT, and then I think kids at Caltech, and the kids at MIT. So once their computers were networked back in the 70s, the kids at MIT, well, they realized, yeah, but those California kids have good pot. And so they facilitated this transaction. But it wouldn't be for several decades that Netscape would release the SSL protocol and allow, have the technology to actually transact online, right? And then there was even a little bit of debate at the beginning. The powers that be were worried about the commercialization of the web, that they weren't wrong, right? Because now everything is all about advertisement and data. That's the kind of blood that pumps through this. But we are where we are today. Anyway, I like this as just a little bit of a history, because if you think about it, in the course of human civilization, we're really living in a remarkable time at the beginning of being able to connect with everyone. So where I got started, and I don't mean this to be self-aggrandizing. I'm one of the least important people in this room. But for me, it's interesting and it's informative, because everyone comes into this industry for whatever reason, through their own ways. For me, after college, I have a psychology degree. I moved to a town, and I was playing music full time. And then I joined a friend of mine in a startup. It was a race series, actually. And I learned, the very first thing I learned was cold fusion. If you remember cold fusion, basically programming via XML, which prepared me really well for my Magento days. But once that failed, after a few months, I had to go home with my tail between my legs. I was no longer in the band, and how the fuck am I going to make money? So, of course, the first thing I did was start working in a bar, like any good musician. And then a friend of ours who lived in town, his mother had a store. I live in a very touristic city, and she had a store in the tourist district selling nautical seashell kind of things, and she wanted to start selling stuff online. And so I was like, well, I've kind of learned programming a little bit. I didn't really know what I didn't know, and I found OS Commerce. And that's how I taught myself development. Incidentally, this is the worst way to teach yourself development possible. Partly because OS Commerce was really a collective issue, like a collective project, and it was also in the earlier days of PHP. So it really started in PHP 3 before PHP had useful things like classes. Yeah, so I ended up eventually spending a lot of time unlearning everything I learned in those days. But as it turns out, I wasn't even thinking about a career in e-commerce at that point. It's just though over time I started working for a local web development company. Incidentally, the guy that founded that company was arrested for manufacturing lots of marijuana. There's a lot of pot in my talk, and me too. He's an interesting guy. He grew up in a nudist colony, of course. None of this is relevant to your careers, but in the course of building websites for local businesses, I kept having to use OS Commerce, right? Because it was the biggest bang for your buck. And by then I knew it was a pain in the ass, and we actually had some really sharp developers in the company. And so one of the things that was difficult for us to reconcile was, why would we use this obviously shitty application when everything like everything else fits into our like our release management, our we had kind of early forms of testing and everything, and it was because it was there, and because e-commerce is hard. And then a guy, he founded a company, an agency, Blue Acorn, hired me as his first employee. It was all about Magento. I actually read the very first Magento book, Mark Kimsel's book, on the flight to my honeymoon. Again, my wife, she lives a rich and interesting life. And I knew when I got back and I was going to start my job that I was going to be an expert because I knew Zen framework and everything else. And I told him told this guy I'd have our first customer website up in 2 weeks. About 2 months later, we released this website. And I remember actually I had no idea how Magento's layout worked. So my first website, there was a div on the homepage that like I didn't want it here. I wanted it here. I 100% did that with JavaScript because I couldn't figure out how to do it server side. Fast forward, I ended up teaching a lot of Magento. And that's where I really learned. I still didn't understand how the hell layout XML worked, actually. Big secret when I started teaching Magento. Thankfully, the folks at Magento paired me with the most wonderful Vinay Kopp, who's still around the ecosystem working for Huva, who are also a very brilliant, frustrating for me in my current role, but very excellent contribution to the Magento ecosystem. But Vinay really helped me learn all these things. So one of your takeaways from this talk is, yes, absolutely, if you don't understand something, just start teaching it, right? And I mean, ideally, you get good quickly. We've had some of those teachers. I'm sure you've had teachers in your career where it was obvious they shouldn't be teaching. And then eventually, so Magento created a position for me, being the kind of outgoing person that I am with some technical chops. And that's how I ended up, traveling all over the place and hanging out in Paris with Jacques from Monsieur Buz. And he actually gave me my favorite scarf, which I actually have with me today. Kept me very warm. Thank you, Jacques. And, fast forward long enough, finally, my lifelong dream of speaking at a Sylius conference has come true. Thank you, my friend. Okay, that's enough of a tour there. This was my wife. She started this trip off for me in Florida in our little plane. If you know anything about me, you would know I would never, ever be a good pilot because I don't really like lists or doing anything. But the purpose of this conversation today, why open source? Why does it matter? There are fantastic solutions out there like Shopify. Yes, I used fantastic and Shopify in the same sentence. I often recommend people use Shopify when I have conversations with merchants because they, especially when they think that they have challenges, but they don't really have actual challenges. Like if your requirements fit into the box of a SaaS-based solution, you absolutely should use a SaaS-based solution. There's no question. There's a whole total cost of ownership benefit. You get a lot of, you basically de-risk your investment. You know that this thing's going to be updated and maintained. In our world, we trade off some of that certainty around cost of ownership really for flexibility. So I maintain that there's like a whole Newtonian physics involved in this business. I think in programming in general, like whatever is a benefit over here has like an equal and opposite detriment. And it just depends on your requirements as a merchant or as an agency, whether it's good or bad. But the reason that I've got fractals all over my presentation here is, again, to remind us that ultimately what we do is we manage chaos. And what's the best way for a product company to manage chaos? Is it to try and build the perfect thing for everyone? No. The more and more opinion that we at Shopware, or former we at Magento, or the more opinions that we have and that we build into our product, basically the less sort of the less we are good at what we're doing, right? We're baking in opinions, we're baking in assumptions, and then eventually someone wants to use your solution, and then they have to back out those assumptions. So the way when I have to have these conversations at the merchant level, at the technology buyer level, I like to point out that, we'll use the Shopify example again. Shopify, for the behemoth that it is, and keep in mind, yet another German-created platform like Shopware, like Commerce Tools, for what it is and for what it tries to do, which is own e-commerce, especially in North America, they only own, depending on your measurement, about 10%, right? And I would maintain that merchants really want to fit in their box, but commerce is so hard and so arbitrary that only 10% can do that, and probably a good portion of that 10% are really shoehorning themselves and their requirements to fit in that box. Sometimes adjusting your requirements to match your solution or better match your solution, there's always an element of that is good. But back to general product development. So the team at Sylius, the team at Shopware, to some degree the team, well, I'll say more Mage OS, the Magento part of Magento, not the Adobe part of Magento these days. We build in a good starting point. And ideally we build it in such a way that, hey, you can turn a key and you have a full-featured solution. But you build that full-featured solution with the assumption that any and all parts of it can be changed. So how is it that billions of dollars of GMV end up flowing through open source code bases? I mean, I know when I was at Magento, I think by the time I left, we calculated about $150 billion US GMV was flowing through that code base. At Shopware, we're a little over 20 billion, and that's just our business in Europe. How does that happen? Well, it happens because we put a good tool set out there, but no one using Shopware or Sylius or Magento would ever should ever be using it directly as it comes out of the box with just a theme slapped on it. If that's your use case, have you met Shopify? Right? I mean, you choose these solutions and you give up some of the ease of maintenance and the assurance around TCO. You give that up so that you have flexibility, so you can build what the hell your customers need, or what your operations team needs. And that's where the chaos comes in. So we build this product, we put it out there, and then we let the ecosystem come in and meet that chaotic last kilometer. I'll localize it because I'm in Europe. That last mile, right? We let you all do the work that you do. We could never build all of these solutions for all of these businesses. So the real secret for me of why open source is constantly showing up when it's kind of the last thing that a tech buyer wants to invest in is because you have a great company behind a great product, but with the understanding that it's the ecosystem that manages all of those arbitrary requirements, this one weird customer journey, this hard to pull off integration or multiple integration, maybe among various systems, ERP to PIM to e-commerce hub. That's why we all have jobs. That's why we're all here, right? But it's changing, and that's one of the interesting things. And this is the first time I'm ever giving a talk like this, because we know open source, we know the rules of engagement, we know the benefits of engagement, we know the joy of hanging out going to conferences in Poland and talking about this stuff. But I can tell you for 100% that our world is evolving just like it always has. And in some ways, it's good. It's necessary. In some ways, maybe less so, right? One of the problems that we have as platforms is, and the Shopware is guilty of this to a point, but we talk about things from an architecture-first approach. You see this shit everywhere, right? Look at the Mock Alliance. Anyone familiar with the Mock Alliance? A few of you? Okay. Microservices, API first, cloud native, headless, Mach. So this was an initiative from my counterpart at Commerce Tools, a guy named Kelly Getch, absolutely lovely and brilliant human being. And the Mach Alliance is a masterstroke of marketing, right? So it's a tech association like Mage OS, like the Magento Association. Sorry for that. And all the vendors involved, they have to meet those criteria, but primarily microservices. That was at the core of their messaging because microservices equals flexibility equals composability. Composability, that's the key. Why do I sit in pre-sales meetings with merchants and they say things like, I need to be headless. I need PWA. Any other straw man you can pick out. Like, or I need microservices. So, the first, what is a question that you then respond with? Like, what do you think you mean when you say that? Because I like to do that because it gets back to their actual requirements. Like, oh, well, in our industry, we're in fashion and things change, every 6 months, every 12 months. And so we really need to, okay, so you need flexibility. You need room to grow. You need ease of change. That's a much better requirement to build for. But when merchants are saying architectural terms to us, we as an industry, we've really fucked up, right? But there's a reason we do this. Because it's really hard to talk about this stuff. And it's a convenient shorthand. And it gets picked up by the analysts. And then the analysts teach the customers how to talk about this stuff. So they, when the analyst puts something out, the customers start saying it. So that's this kind of architecture first. And I'm bringing it up because open source, it's kind of in that vein. And open source in e-commerce took a big damn hit from Magento. We've probably met customers who are using Magento, and not to belittle the actual condition of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, but some of them, they have had like physiological symptoms because of the challenges they faced based on their platform decisions in the past. And it's not necessarily the fault of, like, let's say Magento. It's maybe the fault of who was selling the solution and why they sold the solution. But again, when we start talking about open source, I think we can talk about it amongst ourselves, but we have to be much more customer oriented. And we say, hey, okay, you need flexibility, you need ease of innovation. You need to be able to change things and break things quickly and easily, revert, innovate, all of this stuff. And I think open source clearly is the winner here, right? I don't see innovation happening nearly as fast in any other platform. Of course, Shopify has like the bully pulpit. They can build stuff quickly and easily. They can deploy it. But quick and easy for them is on an 8 to 12 month timeline. Who was the first, and basically to this day, really the only meaningful e-commerce platform to roll out meaningful, like non-generative AI features? Shopware. Who gets all the press? Shopify. We had AI Copilot out in May. Shopify drops a big announcement 2 months later, and it's what people talk about. that shit's still not live, right? Innovation happens here in the open source world. But what's going to happen over time is we're going to be talking less and less and less about open source. Because what's going to happen, the future is the applications that you love to work with just sitting up there in an AWS account running, wrapped nicely, probably in some kind of integration environment, whether that's MuleSoft or some other iPaaS or something like that. Because tech buyers expect packaged solutions. Now, they still want the degree of customization and innovation that they've come to expect precisely because of open source and how open source works. But the tech buyers want to see that application sitting there running robustly, easily updated, seamlessly updated. We were having a conversation over coffee earlier. I mean, I have a blog. I don't really do much with it, but the most traffic it gets is from my hosting company and WordPress. And it's like, hey, updated your application, updated your plugins. And that's really the experience that we should be offering to our customers. And that will be the expectation over time. And it doesn't matter, and this is where I bring it back to Sylius. And Gary reminded me of a conversation I had at PHP Bulgaria back in the day where he's sitting there, he's pitching Sylius to me. It's the best fucking thing ever, man. And then he goes and he looks me up and is like, oh, this guy works for Magento. But it's funny though, I heard this conversation several times over the years, like, this thing is the best thing ever. It doesn't matter how technically brilliant a solution is if it's not it's not in the mind of the buyers, because it's still to this day, the people playing golf, the people with marketing degrees, they're often the ones sort of setting the direction, if not making the actual platform decision. And those expectations are the ones that we have to meet. So the better I think we become, so my whole takeaway for you all for this conversation is we need to transform how we think about our problem space. The open source part is great. We keep the open source part. But how we talk about the solution, we talk about the flexibility, we talk about speed of innovation, talk about the benefits, talk about what people get when they choose a solution like Sylius or like Shopware. And if you focus on that, then that is going to get this industry to its, sort of its next iteration, right? That's all I have, because I think I'm, right there, right on time. Damn, I'm good. I'm so good at this. That said, they did build in a little bit of a buffer for me, because I didn't know what shape I would be in. When I come to Poland, I have fun. Does anyone have any agree, disagree? Anything you'd like to add? I mean, so I don't know, folks, if you realize, but there are some real legends of commerce in this room. People who've been making commerce and this business work really, really well. Representatives from Mage OS are here. France is represented. But yeah, I mean, I'm curious what you think about this. Is it really? Yeah. Oh. I just want to say that I slightly disagree. Okay. But I will elaborate on that at 4:30. Oh. See, you don't think he's good at marketing, but that was really good marketing right there. No. Kupa Zwolinski also gets the hardest time getting to SyliusCon award, hopped on a bus in Amsterdam 20 hours ago. And is here, so you can do him the favor of going to a talk. We'll see if he falls asleep halfway through. But for me, it's really important to have this kind of stuff out there because I think it's stuff we should be talking about. Yes. Do I see? Ah. Well, we don't. I'll start with, actually, I'll answer that with a little bit of a thing. I was at NRF, which is this big fucking conference retail conference in the US. It happens in New York in January, which is a great time to go to New York. And if you want to see the amount of money that's available in this world, like I think when I was at Magento, our booth cost over $200,000, right? And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of these booths. So I go over, back then, it was still Demandware. They were part of Salesforce, but I go up to the Demandware booth, and I'm emblazoned in my orange and black like a good Magento evangelist, and I go up, and I'm like, hey, I don't really know much about Demandware. I'd love to get a demo. And this guy just looks at me completely incredulous. He's like, I can't give you a demo. You're a competitor. And I look at him like, is the cure for cancer in there or something? Like this? It's e-commerce. You can't be doing anything like sort of meaningfully secretive. Like it's just e-commerce. So that for me just set the tone of like closed source, open source, right? And I think it is in our nature to exchange. And actually, I went to Shopware's Community Day back in 2016 because I happened to be in Germany, and a lot of my German community members, they had said, "Hey, you should check out Shopware. It's small but mighty, great open source ecosystem, everything." Sat down at the keynote, and I'd done my research, looked up who's who, and I asked the guy next to me after the keynote what he did for Shopware, co-founder, CEO, now my boss. I think not only can we must. So it's an idea we've been kicking around. We at Shopware talked about like how could we join the Mock Alliance because it gets so much paper, so much attention. But in the end, we're not microservices. We're not going microservice direction, so we'll never be part of it. But I think there's an imperative for us to work together. So obviously I'm here at Sylius Conference, but I try and maintain close relationships with all of the different ecosystems because I think we will have strength in numbers. I think our solution becomes stronger the better our competitors are. I mean, hell, at this conference in Austin 2 days ago, I talked with a tech vendor, and I'm getting them hooked up with the right person at Adobe, right? Because, again, the better our competition is, there's plenty of money in this world, in our world, the better we'll do. And certainly, who benefits the most? The merchants, our actual customers. They benefit from all of us doing what we do well and doing what we do better. But I think over time, you're going to have the Shopifys, you're going to have the large enterprise commerce companies setting the topics of conversation and the tone of conversation. And if we don't collaborate, don't come together, we'll end up losing, even though we're right. And that sucks, doesn't it? Yeah. It is damn interesting that this is coming up. I almost put this in my presentation. Yeah, so yes, I'm actually working on this now. We're working on this at Shopware. And if Sylius want to jump in there with us, I'd love for you all to have it. Like, can you talk to the CEO for me? Okay, good. Yeah, I think so. I'll bring myself back down to earth a little bit. I'm an optimist. I'm a glass is half full and it's half full of Zbrodka kind of guy. And sometimes my ideas aren't always practicable. Like the time the other brother was like, Ben, did you sign a contract for a merchant for $30,000 annual value, but you promised $150,000 of extension development? That's my approach to business. I mean, yes, I did this, but sort of life lesson: don't ever surprise your boss with a $150,000 bill, because the whole story there was we needed to build integrations anyway, so we were going to fund this, and this guy knew that we needed these, and he didn't want to pay for them, so the money was going to get spent. But that is my philosophy: is just put the effort in, put the investment in, and the benefits will follow. And I think we'll see evidence of this as we start to collaborate. Yeah, I haven't quite come up with the name yet, But it would be nice. I mean, it's not out of the question that we might even get this done by the end of the year. It'd be amazing if we could actually announce this now that I think about it, because I'm speaking at Symphony Conference in Brussels. Will anyone else be there? Okay. You should be there. You could talk to them after they get out of college. Actually, yeah. No, spend time with your kid. They're kind of fun too. Ours is 30, so we don't have. I don't. God bless you when they become a teenager. Just that's all I'm saying. But yeah, I do think I would love to see the folks at Woo. I'd love to see the folks from Presta. OS Commerce is still around. Anyone working in the space. Yes, I think. Whereas we have the Titans of SaaS, we have the Mock Alliance. Although if you've noticed, their messaging has changed a lot over the past several months. They don't emphasize microservices so much anymore, right? Because I think even they figured this out. But we have to have something to kind of complement that space. That would be my recommendation. So we are working on this at Shopware. Yeah, Gabby. Yeah. Right, it's maddening, isn't it? Right? We literally build the same shit over and over and over. Some people are smart enough to invent companies, like you've got M2E, is the Amazon feed, like the de facto solution in the Magento ecosystem. Fun fact, just found out they have 2,000 Magento 1 customers, still. So your point, sorry, about integrations, about inventing the wheel. Yeah, I hate it. I mean, I'm not much of a developer anymore, but it always drove me crazy to see the same things getting built. Like the whole point, don't repeat yourself. I always loved that aspect of programming, right? I mean, that can become problematic. Not repeating yourself can also, ironically, bind you into a context, just via association. But one thing that would be nice, yes, is how do we find out what has been built before? How do we encourage more and more people to share this stuff? Or even if it's just like, hey, you've got a great solution in this space, encourage them to create a product, to create a service, right? Because the thing is, we're never going to run out of work, at least not for several years, right? So, yeah. So if that's the case, why don't we set ourselves up so that the time that we spend is actually doing meaningful, like innovative stuff, right? Instead of building yet another Amazon feed integration. I love the idea. I think that would be an important aspect of any open source alliance, wouldn't it? I think so. Again, I'm an idealist. You can knock me down. I can take it. I'm old enough that I don't have an ego about this shit anymore. So, any last question? No. Okay. Well, I may or may not be on a train at 5:30. I may stay. I don't know. But feel free. I'll be out here drinking lots of coffee and the water, and then eventually beer. So I'm happy to have a conversation with you all. I'm really easy to find. I'm just Ben at shopware.com. So thank you.